Chapter 3. Discussions. King Stannis, Robb greeted, moving towards the King of the South to shake his hand. The trip from Winterfell had been rather quick, and he was relieved that they had arrived without too much of a problem. Rhaenyra stood on his left, having changed out of her travel clothes and into the dress that made her look every inch a northern queen. Next to Stannis stood Queen Selyse, she looking rather stiff, and Rhaenyra had often thought that the other woman seemed off whenever they had met. She doubted that she would ever actually see her smile. In the few short times that Rhaenyra had encountered Selyse, the woman never looked happy, not even during her husband's coronation that had seen her crowned beside him. "King Robb," Stannis greeted in return. There was much for them to discuss, and he knew that they would have to talk about the threat that was slowly dawning on them. There was no escaping the threat that Daenerys posed to the peace that had settled over Westeros. She would overthrow everyone that had come into power because of what had happened to her family. "There is much for us to discuss," Robb noted with a grim smile. It was not going to be an easy meeting, and he had no idea how Stans would react when they had that conversation about Jon Snow. Robb wanted to do what was best for the man that he had called brother. He had no desire for another war after the last one, but he would fight for Jon if a threat came for him. "Indeed there is. Troubling news from the east," Stannis agreed, knowing that they couldn't ignore that threat. Coming here was a show of strength on both their parts, to show how strong the alliance was against all odds. It was bad enough that they had to consider the threat of another Targaryen. It would be better if she remained across the sea, but it was clear that Daenerys Targaryen had her heart set on reclaiming her father's throne. Rhaenyra stood silently by Robb's side, her dreams only growing more frequent, and she knew that sooner rather than later they would need to deal with her Targaryen cousin. "Prince Oberyn says that she has built an army and is planning an attack in the coming months," Tyrion Lannister stated, reading from the parchment that had arrived, intel that was much needed as they discussed what was to be done. They had fought long and hard to make the country what it was now. It had meant losses for all of them, and there was no desire for another war after everything that had happened. "There has to be something that we can do," Robb said, shaking his head. He could only think about what might come to them when Daenerys arrived. From what he had heard, she had amassed an army to take them all out. How many people would die for her version of revenge, for her version of justice? The stories they had heard did not sit well with any of them. "Maybe we should just have her killed. No more House Targaryen," Stannis mused, sipping on his drink. He didn't want to fuss over a girl that didn't know the country like they did. The last time that Daenerys had been here was when she was born, before being shipped off with her older brother to live in Pentos for the rest of her life. Once they had thought they should just let her be, she was living her life and married to some Khal who would have no interest in traveling across any oceans to attack a land he didn't know. "Killing is what got us into this mess," Robb reminded, shaking his head. This had been brought upon them because Robert Baratheon had tried to poison Daenerys. He hadn't realized what would have happened if she survived. His own thoughts turned to Jon. Would he fall under Stannis' no more Targaryen rule if they weren't careful? Would he have to die for the peace to be preserved? This was what they had to deal with now, and Robb wanted to make sure that she wasn't coming for his blood and that of his wife and children. He wanted to keep his entire family safe from another war. There were about 10,000 men with her and 3 dragons. There was no way that they could defend completely against that, and Robb feared what this could mean, that he would lose everything that he had fought for. There was silence for a moment, knowing that Robert Baratheon had been a complete idiot while he had been king. His actions had caused a mess that was still affecting them all. "What do you suggest we do?" Stannis questioned, knowing that they couldn't just ignore the fact that she was building an army with the intent on invading Westeros. He didn't know what Daenerys would do when she arrived in Westeros, but Stannis had a feeling that she would destroy the 2 houses that had stood against her father and had caused her to live in exile. House Martell might stand a chance since they had once been allies, and Elia Martell had been murdered along with most of House Targaryen, and they had withstood the anger of House Targaryen before. Robb opened his mouth, his mind turning to the preparations that he had seen made around Winterfell, since Rhaenyra's dreams had started back up, and he knew that the Gold Company would be their best bet. "The Golden Company has been preparing our realms for a while now. Perhaps we can spare a few men to help you prepare," Robb stated, not revealing just how much had been done since he had returned to Winterfell, that the North and her realms were preparing as they spoke. Stannis nodded his head at the idea, no doubt that the gold company would have ways of dealing with the Targaryen pest that threatened their shores. We could send a team of diplomats to talk with her, Tyrion suggested, looking between the two kings. He had been surprised that he had been asked to sit in on this meeting, but he knew that it was an honor. Tyrion served on Stannis' small council, Master of Coin, as he had done under Joffrey, and he knew that his father's experiences and teachings were the reason that he sat here today. Daenerys knew nothing about the country that she wanted to reclaim. From what he had heard, she had been raised on stories that people waited on her return and wanted her back. But the people of Westeros had little interest in such a thing, and the idea that Daenerys might be bringing a war to their doors so soon after the last one, that had just ended. Let her know we won't tolerate any attack on any of the kingdoms. The three kings are united in this, Tyrion continued, knowing that they had to be united on this. There could be no divides between them if they were going to take on Daenerys and win. Robb, Stannis, and Dorian would not allow her to threaten them. Perhaps a united front would give her reason to doubt her decision to come here. That could work, Robb replied, looking to Stannis. They would send men from the three kingdoms to represent them and ensure that Daenerys understood that she would be making a mistake with coming here. She had to understand that people didn't want her to come back and start another war after the War of the Five Kings, not when they had the White Walkers coming their way. Stannis nodded his head. He didn't know what was going to happen, but he hoped this would work. He wanted nothing more than to get this sorted out as quickly as possible. Then we shall each send representatives to this Queen Daenerys. Let's see if we can end this before it's even started, Stannis ordered. Knowing that they would have to be careful who they picked, he sat back, wondering who would be his choice for such a task. Whoever went would need a good head on their shoulders, someone who would not antagonize Daenerys and make the situation that they found themselves in any more difficult. It would also benefit them to have someone see what they were up against. Whispers about the lack of control Daenerys had over her three dragons was hard to ignore. Talk of the Black Dragon murdering children and sheep was not something that they could often ignore. Stannis wondered what she would do if she had no control over the creatures that granted her such power. Leaning back in his seat, Robb pondered the situation and how he was going to break the news about Jon to Stannis. How could he avoid another war, especially when he wanted to keep Jon safe?